Well, once again, Denzians of YouTube, it's time to delve into another film on this review podcast, this time looking at the new release of The Raven, starring John Cusack as, of course, Edgar Allan Poe as Sherlock Holmes. Kind of, sort of, not really. General impressions on this film is that well, I'll put it this way. I went into this film expecting it to either be really great, awesome film, or completely horrible, and it proved to be neither. It's a middle-of-the-road, mediocre, passable, but in a bad way type of a film. I'd almost put this in line with Centurion. It's a film, if I were to catch it on television, I'd probably sit and watch it. But is it worth paying New Jersey prices $10 to see it in the theaters? Probably not. Unless you have $10 and you just want to burn an afternoon doing something, this one you might want to sit out. The best way to compare it, and the best thing that is being compared to, looks like by most people, is, of course, the Guy Pearce Sherlock Holmes. The first one, not Game of Shadows, which is a little bit more James Bondy. And in this respect, yeah, it is, except they don't have that Sherlock Holmes super detective. They kind of split that into both Edgar Allan Poe here, who is not really a super detective. His knowledge is the knowledge of his murder, or his stories, which of course are being, in this film, recreated by a crazed killer. The more Sherlock Holmesy of the character is played by Luke Evans as Detective Fields, who is still not that Sherlock Holmes level kind of deduction, or had that crazy ability. He even openly admits some of the stuff he winds up discovering is just kind of by happenstance and accident. So it's not quite up there, and I think that's to the movie's detriment. Fields, as a detective, doesn't have that air of mystique. He's rather kind of played as the intense detective that you'd expect from that period. You'd expect this is the kind of more traditional detective that a Sherlock Holmes guy would play off of, where he would kind of do more stuff by the books, come to more of the normal logical conclusions, but Sherlock Holmes would do something more unorthodox to get the real solution to. So he kind of fails in that. Not that he performs badly. In fact, he does an okay job, and you can see he's got some intensity in his performance of trying to be that kind of detective that's always thinking, is the smartest guy in the room normally, but isn't trying to show it. He's more intent on getting his job done. Which does kind of crash a little bit with John Cusack's portrayal of Edgar Allan Poe, who is very demanding that he gets his respect. It's almost like Poe in this movie is aware of his historical legacy before his death. We are introduced to him kind of going, in a bar, kind of trying to prove that he is this famous person, this famous, well-read poet, who also happens to be broke. And he's kind of like that through most of the beginning of the film, and that's really where the Poe character shines, or at least John Cusack's portrayal of him really shines as this kind of guy that is way smarter than everybody else, and he knows it, but he's not getting the recognition or anything he should be getting for being this great literary figure. He even calls himself that. He's one of the great American literary figures in history. Luckily, he happened to be right on that call, but you get the sense he's really got a sense of himself, and that is where he is the most fun as a character, when he's purposely being an asshole to people. Very meanly, especially to his fiance's father, who does not realize that his daughter is in love with Edgar Allan Poe's character. He is constantly basically what we would call in the modern context trolling Brendan Gleeson's character, Captain Hamilton, who I'm sure you guys will recognize Brendan Gleeson as Gibbs from Pirates of the Caribbean. Sorry for the pause there. it's fun to see him like that. However, once it really gets into the plot and the murders, Cusack's character really, or Cusack's portrayal, I hate to say character because it's based on an actual person this time, really starts to clamp up a bit. He doesn't have the cockiness he has earlier in the film, and he's less of a fun character to follow around. And actually, for a good little while in this, he kind of just really does take a back seat to Fields' character in this in the investigation. Though I must say, in the film's favor, is that it is a hard R. There's some pretty gruesome stuff there. Yeah, they show they do people's necks slit open very well, very bloody. However, the film is held back by CGI gore, which actually destroys what would have been probably a classic scene for kind of gore fans or hardcore horror fans, is of course the pendulum scene. Now, there was a little bit of this shown in the trailer, but yeah, they show this guy, the entire slicing of this guy. It's cutting through him constantly, and the setup for this is actually the most perfect setup for a live action special effect, a real special effect. The guy's on a big, thick table, so you could easily stick an actor, having how you normally do this. You can have the body prosthetic set up so it would cut, the fake part, but you have an actor kind of sitting underneath the table, propped up so like part of his body is actually real there. It's hard to describe, just talking here on the podcast, but it's a very simple special effects method that they could have used to really just make this a real live action cutting. Instead, it looks like they really just CG'd the blood and the guts, and it takes you out of the film, especially considering all the other acts of violence are generally generally live action. All the other gore is live action gore. I have no idea why they did not actually set this up as it probably would have been cheaper and it would have looked so much better. Maybe the blood wouldn't have been flying as much, but it would have looked better if it actually cut and you had the prosthetics kind of shooting out the blood, actual blood. It might have not done exactly what you wanted to do, but it would have looked real. Same thing with a couple of shots, like when we're introduced to Edgar Allan Poe, he's walking the streets of Baltimore and he comes across a bunch of ravens eating the corpse of a cat with kittens. But the ravens are CGI, and the way it's shot, it's like you could have done this with real life ravens. Just have some domesticated ravens. There are experts in Hollywood that just raise birds so they can be put in films. Wait till their normal feeding time. Stick in the prosthetic dead cat some little pieces of meat that they would normally eat, and film. All they have to do is film, eat some of the meat out of the cat corpse, and fly away when John Cusack gets close enough. There was no reason to do CGI with that. No reason. The birds did not have to do anything specific. I can kind of get when they have the raven fly out of a coffin and then kind of land right next to the corpse a bit. That's a little understandable. You have to have that bird fly in a particular way with the actors being very kind of nervous and then land at a particular spot. You can kind of maybe forgive that, but for the opening scene CGI birds, no reason. No reason is needed. Now, as for the actual plot, I think I've already gone on for this. There's a killer who is inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's work and decides to recreate the murders. And is forcing, after a little while, he decides to force Edgar Allan Poe into helping the authorities by kidnapping his betrothed, secretly betrothed Emily Hamilton character, played by Alice Eve. A pretty standard plot contrivance to get a character involved in a murder mystery who's not, part of the police force. If you know Poe's poem, and most are poems, And most Americans, if they paid attention in school, will recall these. I mean, I remember, at least from my education in high school, I probably read about at least half a dozen Edgar Allan Poe uh, stories, including Mask of the Red Death, The Telltale Heart. I am ashamed that I forget, but the Pendulum one, a couple others. I forget the names, but I do remember the actual stories. Most Americans are basically required to read Poe at some point. So I understand maybe if you're reviewing this as a foreign audience and you're not as familiar with the works of Poe, it'll lose some of its impact. But actually, if you have to be very familiar with American literature in general, I think, to get a big gist of this film. They've threw in a lot of references. There's references to Emerson in there. Well, Jules Verne, but I think most people know who Jules Verne is. But there's a lot of literary references and kind of literary talk in this movie. If you know literature, that's great. Luckily, I've been on a bit of a fiction kick myself. I've been reading. I have the entire complete collection of H.P. Lovecraft's fictional writings. And Lovecraft was his self-confessed major inspiration for writing was Edgar Allan Poe. So it seems to fit with me right now. But the plot is somewhat expected. You've kind of seen it before, but it's not done horribly. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are just going to run and say the movie was horrible when it was mediocre, in my opinion. I think a lot of people tend to have a bit of a binary response to films nowadays. They don't really judge films on an actual scale. It's either the film was great or the film sucked completely. In reality, there's different degrees, and this is one of those films where there's bad elements in there, but there's good. So, and overall, the impression you get is it passes the time. You're not displeased. I mean, maybe if you're a real hardcore Poe fan, you might not like some of the things that were done, or maybe some sort of hardcore fan of some sort of genre this crosses paths with, 18th century detective. But at the same point, you might love this film because it's doing all this, literary allusions, talking about literature and meaning, and of course, just having Edgar Allan Poe go out and solve a real murder mystery. The plot itself is somewhat ridiculous, but one of the trailers for this movie was Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So that's actually, I think, probably one of the more strategically placed trailers, in just that if you think it's ridiculous that there's a movie about Edgar Allan Poe chasing down a serial killer, you put that trailer in front of this movie, and all of a sudden, Edgar Allan Poe chasing, this actually looks rather reasonable in comparison to, Abe Lincoln hunting down vampires. Which, by the way, I am still going to see that movie. That movie actually looks enjoyable, and from what I heard, the book was actually well written. But I digress. The only other thing probably that I did not like about this film, that I think is a real legitimate criticism, is that, and by the way, this isn't a spoiler. I'm going to get into spoilers in a moment, but I say this isn't a spoiler because this is how the movie opens up. It says it's in the last days of Edgar Allan Poe's life. It says it opens up saying Edgar Allan Poe was found near death on a park bench in Baltimore, and I forget what the date was. No one is quite clear on the last few days of his life. So it implies that we're basically almost at the end of his life. Basically implying Poe's going to be dead by the end of this film. And sometimes films do this because they think it's going to build tension, knowing the character is vulnerable, but we know not to expect him to die until he's sitting on a park bench, being rather sickly. So it doesn't build any tension. We can kind of guess at, you know, it does remove a lot of the tension. Hell, if they didn't even describe his death, just going, Edgar Allan Poe died, whatever date, it might have at least, and not gave us the details, we might at least go, at any moment he might get, his injury and get killed. But no, when you describe how he actually was found, and it then show, basically they do the little showing the end of the movie where he's sitting on the bench feeling sick, and then quickly shoot back to the beginning. Okay, we now know that there's no tension with this character because he's safe as long as he's not in that situation. And even then, apparently, he still lives for a couple days. But now it's time to get into spoiler territory real quick. And the spoilers are going to be in reference to the actual mystery, which in a movie like this is important. You want to be guessing who is the killer. And this movie does at least give us it as... It doesn't just introduce somebody completely that we've never seen before. Now, sometimes you do need to do that in movies where it's more about the chase, especially with a film like this, kind of just going around and covering the clues. But in reality, it's normally, and everyone kind of knows this, one of the ancillary characters in the background that you've seen just enough to go, oh yeah, I remember him from those scenes, but generally not a major character. Sometimes it is, but often there's some huge plot holes and plot contrivances when that's the case. And now I'm going into full spoiler warnings. So, if you've seen the film, or if you don't want it spoiled, I think you've gotten my impression thus far. If you want to come back and hear my opinions on it, go see the film. Or don't see the film if I've dissuaded you, and yet you still are afraid of spoilers. So, everyone here wants to know, who is the killer? And I will give the film some credit. Now, I was genre aware or genre savvy enough to know, like I said, it's going to be one of these characters that are somewhat in the background. And you pretty much know from the get-go. It's not Poe. He's the main character, and people will get in shit if you're trying to say Poe was a mass, actually killed people. You get the sense that Fields isn't the killer. You can kind of see he's clearly in different places, and so you really start centering on basically one of two people. You really look at one person in particular, and that is Poe's editor. And the movie is aware that he is the most likely character that would normally be. And I will give the film some credit for this, because it did fool me. For a while I was thinking it was the editor. However, it turns out to be Ivan, the editor's assistant, who really likes Poe. And you only see him in about 2 scenes. And the one scene he's basically just used to kind of introduce the editor. Poe comes in and very early in the film goes, did they put in my review? And you could tell that this guy is the type of suck-up character, but they don't put him in the film enough for you to really think he's gonna be the guy. However, near the end, right before they revealed, or a little bit before they revealed him, I was starting to think, it might be the other guy. Because they had him in a scene with the editor again, and you kind of recognize he does seem to be the guy that's kind of sucking up the Poe. And the killer is a person that really likes Poe's work. And so I was going, I think they're starting to fake me out. I think it's going to be this Ivan character. So I was able to call it, but they did... I wasn't 100% sure. So I think I'm still giving them some credit, because they did make me guess, even though I was genre aware enough to kind of know the pool of suspects. But they did a good enough job. And I'm not sure if this is historically accurate. This isn't a spoiler thing, by the way. But if Edgar Allan Poe had a pet raccoon, and if they did, regardless, he had to have a pet raccoon in this movie. That's awesome. I wanted to see more of the pet raccoon. They at least made sure that they showed the pet raccoon survived. I'm going to assume Fields kept him afterwards, because, I don't know, I guess he was my favorite character. Not Fields, the raccoon, because, Well, it's a raccoon. Though I am very extremely interested in what they were planning to do with Fields, because he said he was. Have you heard of this guy Verns? Jules Verns reminds me a lot of you, implying that he's going to go do the same thing to Verns that he did with Poe. Which makes me think, what the hell was Ivan going to do with Vern? Was he going to build a submarine and try to get him on a submarine? You know, it's a little harder to do the early Victorian sci-fi in the Victorian period than it is to just do murders. I don't know. Either way, Fields, Poe, even though he traded his life for his beloved Emily, he still was able to get final revenge, and he revealed who Ivan's real name is. And Fields just goes out to Paris and outright murders him. Because why would he arrest the person who he probably clearly has evidence for at this point? You know, you can take him back and everyone go, yes, that's Ivan. Take him back to Baltimore, and I'm pretty sure you could have people identify him as Ivan, who worked at the printing shop. I don't know. Like I said, the film was forgettable. Well, I mean, I don't want to say forgettable. If you enjoy this type of movie, you probably will like this film. If you really enjoyed the first Sherlock Holmes film, you'll probably also find this movie enjoyable, or at least decent to watch. You won't feel, like you got ripped off watching it. And I think in general, you're not going to feel ripped off, but you're not going to feel like you just got out of a great movie. Like, oh God, I'm glad I saw this. Unless you're maybe a Poe fan. So I hope I gave you enough information to actually make a wise choice in whether to see this film. Because this is one of those films, actually, that you kind of should see. Or you might want to have a review, listen to a few reviews to get a sense if you're going to want to actually see this film. And if you didn't like it, I probably understand completely why. Especially if you had to pay $10 like I did. Well, that is it for now. Signing off. A bit of site news for you guys is my ongoing reviews of The Legend of Korra might be a little delayed tomorrow because I have things to do. And I might not be able to catch the show during its airing. I'll see if it's up on the website when I get back. If not, it might have to wait till it's eventually put up on the web. So there might be a delay in that. And of course, stay tuned for next week, because the summer movie season begins. The Avengers have arrived. I will be going to the midnight showing. I don't know if I will do a midnight recording, but you can expect Friday my review of the Avengers will be up, as will about 10,000 other people's. So, signing off for now, guys.